The South Korea of today is very different from what it was 150 years ago. While deeply connected to neighboring states through cultural, economic, and political exchanges, Choson maintained a cautious stance towards European traders, resisting their encroachment. Because of this, Choson was condemned and deemed isolationist. But it practiced complex politics unrecognized by the outside world. Traditionally heavily influenced by Confucianism and social hierarchy, there was a certain way of life that was accepted. The Yanban, or minute upper class, ruled over the vast lower class.
The first thing inculcated in a Korean child's mind is respect for his father. In fact, the four dreadful things which a boy fears most are earthquake, wind, fire, and father.
Such simplest opinions of Korea were negatively formed due to their reluctance to conform to European values of technological advancement and exchange. What Europe failed to recognize was just how nuanced the society really was. Then, in the 1890s, due to Japan's colonial interest in the neighboring regions, Japan became increasingly involved with Korean politics.
The Empire of Japan made repeated and quite dogged attempts to invade the sovereign nation of Korea, finally achieving their goal on August 22, 1910, when Japan announced their annexation of Korea to the outside world.
But after defeating China in the Sino-Japanese War of 1895 and Russia in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, Japan forcibly took Korea under its wing in 1910.
Under Japanese occupation, Koreans were forced to assume Japanese names, prohibited from speaking their own language, and even forced to worship Japanese gods in their temples.
We arrive at the port of Seoul. This fellow is a typical example of the native Korean. He bows to the dominion of Japan, but he firmly declines to admit the superiority of Japan's intellectual and moral culture over his own.
For decades, Japanese imperialism cast a long shadow over Korea, not just through occupation, but through a systematic effort to erase its identity. Japanese propaganda painted Koreans as backward, incapable of self-rule, a narrative that seeped beyond Asia, finding eager audiences in the West. American media, shaped by these biases, echoed Japan's rhetoric, portraying Koreans as inferior, even savage, in films, newspapers, and academic texts, embedding prejudice into global consciousness. Japan radically changed Korea in a short period of time, which is now known as colonization period. This led to a wave of Zainichi Koreans, those who fled to Japan in order to search for a better life.
Korea was in terrible shape. All the farmers had been dragged to Japan. There was nothing to eat in Korea, yet in Japan there was white rice. The Japanese had taken all the food from Korea and brought it to Japan.
Due to the limited freedom that Japan gave the Korean people, protesters emerged in all forms.
On March 1st, 1919, hundreds and thousands of Koreans protested against Japan's colonization, known as the March 1st movement or the 3일 movement.
During Korea's March 1st movement, it is estimated that 56,000 people were arrested, 15,000 wounded, and 7,000 massacred in the fight for independence.
It sparked a series of similar protests not only across Korea, but also abroad in Japan, China, and the US. As well as the activists, other groups including students and farmers took to the streets to try to secure their country's independence.
어른도 아이들도 오래오래 기억하면 좋을 역사의 한 장면이니 더 오래 기억에 남았으면 좋겠습니다.
Due heavily to Japan's mobilization of its colonial subjects for World War II, they banned the use of Korean names, the Korean language, and demolished historical landmarks in an attempt to neutralize antagonizing forces.
내 아버지가 목사였습니다. 그런데 그 일제시대 때 신사참배를 강요하고 그래서 중국으로 이주했지요. 간단히 얘기하면 일본이 완전히 그 우리 한국을 이 자기 나라로 아주 완전히 그냥 말도 거기에 대해서 이제 우리 한국 민족은 이제 반발하는 겁니다.
After 30 years of colonization, war broke out.
The U.S. battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay was the setting for the signing of the surrender terms, which officially brought the war with Japan to an end.
And Korea was freed for a few days.
1945, Korea was liberated. So after that, Korea was in a lot of chaos.
Immediately, Korea was split by two Americans, Charles Bonesteel and Dean Rusk, in Washington, D.C., who decided based on a map in their office. Somehow, the Soviet Union agreed. American and Soviet soldiers entered Korea with the intention to stabilize it until it could govern itself. Warring political parties emerged, and the two nations could not reach an agreement. South of the 38th parallel, Cymone won a UN-hosted election in 1948, while Kim Il-sung declared his position as the leader of the Soviet-occupied North. The Republic of Korea was established in the South, followed shortly by the establishment of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the North a month later.
On June 25, 1950, North Korean armed forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded the Republic of Korea.
Now the latest from the front. Tonight's bulletins continue to stress the southward push of at least 3 North Korean divisions in conjunction with those expanding beachheads on the east coast.
콩콩 광대포 소리가 나고 막 그랬어요. 수많은 사람들이 한강을 건너가려고 넘었는데 우리는 그냥 우리 집에서 살고 있었어요.
Communism spreading to the south. People got mixed up. A lot of young people, the theory of communism, no rich, no poor, just the people live the same rights.
It is estimated that about 4 million North and South Koreans died in the war, far more than US and Soviet deaths combined. But with the end of the war did not come an end to suffering. The Soviet Union largely withdrew from North Korea, but remained strongly politically tied. America remained permanently stationed in South Korea. With the two Koreas split, our narrative will turn towards South Korea. In the place of two globally dominant countries rose a controversial militaristic president, Park Chung-hee, in 1967. And then in 1980, the Gwangju Massacre under President Chun Doo-hwan.
It's a very, very sad history. It was a student-led demonstrations against Chun Doo-hwan. There are many people who opposed with that decision. So knowing that there was a protest in Gwangju, the Korean government, they killed the citizens. Almost 2,000 people were killed by that unexplainable massacre.
Martial law troops take over the Jeollanam-do Provincial Government Building in the early hours of May 27, 1980, claiming they are rooting out rioters.
I remember I was on my way to work on May 18, 1980, when soldiers were parachuted into the city. They started chasing me.
In 1987, South Korea officially became a democracy, but the pain from the past could not be forgotten. Intergenerational trauma, family bonds, and a suffering that was carried through a larger diaspora became a large part of the Korean identity. That inner pain, carried through generations, is called Han.
The 20th century was like a painful period for the Koreans. They experienced invasion, war, poverty, and oppression.
Han is more oppressed. Sadness. It's the feeling that you cannot get out of the situation even if you want to. But at the same time, you have the hope.
The common ways that it's described, or it would be described, as a uniquely Korean concept, something that runs in the blood of Koreans, intergenerational trauma, grief, sorrow.
The oppression is engraved into your DNA. So your language is shaped around it. I think in terms of South Korea's nation building after 1945, you can detect a strong concurrence of Han in terms of, I think, South Korea's own reckoning with its colonial past and also with that mid-century Cold War trauma of division and war.
It gives a feeling of a mix of sadness, anger, and hurt.
It's a grief, it's a sorrow, it's a rage that gets inherited across generational lines.
Currently, Korea has entered the path of freedom, independence, but the memories of that history in the past still live in the people's minds.
In terms of the history of Han, it is a relatively recent emergence as a concept. We can really trace this modern discourse of Han to the early 20th century during the Japanese colonization of the Korean peninsula.
There were two different paths working for Japanese government, and one is working towards the Koreans' independence.
The idea of Koreans having this unique sense or aesthetic of Han traces actually to Japanese colonial discourse, racializing Korean subjects as a collective people characterized with this melancholy or sorrow. Another way to put it is that it's the colonizer's language that we really see this idea of Han emerging.
Right after Japanese occupation, grandmas or mothers are telling their babies to stop crying by saying, "Stop crying, otherwise Japanese policemen are coming to get you."
The way I feel about Han is when I visit the buildings in the past.
You could see a lot of memorial places in Gwangju.
During the democratization movements, there is this language of Han that surfaces that challenged the authoritarian rule at the time.
My name is John Daly. To some of us, this is a nightmare. But to the Korean people, this was destruction of their land, their towns, their homes.
Not just with Japanese colonization, but the Korean War, right? The Cold War, division of the Korean peninsula, the creation of two separate Koreas. The language of Han gave these people a lot of effective narrativizing strategies.
Han is expressed by the stories of resilience, heartbreak, and the drive to overcome suffering.
A lot of Korean American literature of the 20th century expresses this notion of Han.
Through these novels, we had a chance to experience the concept of Han. They just portray the feeling indirect way.
In Jin Lee's Pachinko is actually a good example of a diasporic novelist tapping into these notions of Han to tell a intergenerational family history.
War movies between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law situation.
다들 않고 뭐래? 난 빨리 걷게 돼서 장순영한테로 가볼 테야.
The Korean drama, Mr. Sunshine.
I have watched the historical TV show called Mr. Sunshine, and I think it gave me a sense of Han from that because the background of the show is about the pre-colonial period.
These are really material examples of ways that contemporary Koreans are finding these transnational connections and resonance with struggles elsewhere in different contexts. And I think it can be a very potent and powerful script of identities and movements.
There was a community of being independent activists. Going back to the concept of Han, it's a communal feeling, right? It's not just the one person protest against Japan society, but there was a community.
Expressions of Han for this one individual is very different from this other individual.
Communal and also at the same time personal sense of feeling.
It's a really difficult concept to concretely nail down, right? Over the course of the 20th century, it exists as both a way to express difficult emotions around personal grief, tendencies to map that onto this more collective idea of Han. And I think that's where a lot of contradictions emerged. Is it still Han if you don't connect it to something that's recognized as national trauma? I think that also takes us into questions about how Han is gendered.
Confucianism puts women under lower rank than men, so men can do whatever they want. They can be forgiven, but
woman has to be submissive and suppress their opinion. So that here again, oppression, suppression.
There's been research done actually about how women and men experienced the 1945 liberation from Japanese rule in different ways. For example, you see men being very comfortable narrating their life events and mapping that onto very distinct national events. But for many women, actually, that wasn't a very clear-cut and straightforward case. In many ways, their individual and personal sufferings might not be immediately translatable to national history or national suffering.
Understanding where Han comes from is a crucial part to understanding Korean culture. However, it is evident that Han has changed over time as Korea grows into stability and away from suffering. The question now is, do Koreans understand and feel Han beyond scholarship, literature, and pop culture?
I think there will be some people who has Han currently living people. They wanted to like meet their family, but they are in North Korea and like become their Han that will not be resolved at all.
One of the things that has for a very long time evoked really strong sentiments that often do, I think, find expression as Korean Han, Korean division, and the impacts of that on Korean families.
Korea in December 1950. Looks cold, don't it? Colder than the heart of a comic.
Personal, individual, and familial level sufferings of being permanently separated from one's family, right, I think has frequently found expression as intergenerational Han. Today's young Koreans actually don't really have a direct personal connection or experience.
I believe that I've never felt that feeling directly in my life.
없는 것 같아요. Because I think Han is more really heavy feeling, but I don't think I have an experience in that.
Han resonates differently than it might for older generation. For our grandparents and their parents, they could directly connect with the Han because they actually experienced the rapid economic transformation that followed, because they experienced and grew up in the aftermath of this historical event.
I didn't experience the Gwangju Democratic Movement, the colonial period between Japan and Korea.
My generation may not feel the same. I think we can learn and feel or make a sense of Han.
For my daily life, I don't really think of it. When I read or watch any Korean movies or books, you can easily find it as subject.
I visited Gwangju, and a taxi driver in Gwangju asked where I was from, and then I told him, yeah, I'm from Daegu. And then he started to point out that we were passing by a key site of the Gwangju Democratic Movement. So this made me realize that the emotion of Han, helplessness, still lingers on the people of Gwangju.
Less Confucius belief dominates Korean society as time goes. More gender equality.
Previous generations, there were a lot of people who had very personal stakes in the issue of reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I think surveys today actually show that for the younger Koreans, there is a lot more of apathy towards this issue. And in many ways, why should they care? It is an issue that is very temporally far removed from their lived experiences and even in their more immediate generations in the family.
Considering all of the historical weight and trauma that creates this sense of Han, the next big question is Han only Korean? Can anyone else in the world who has experienced generational trauma have a sense of Han?
Yeah, I think Han can be felt by someone who is not Korean also.
I was very confident that, okay, this is the very unique feeling that only Koreans can resonate with. But maybe I should have more open-minded. I wouldn't say that, yeah, absolutely can feel the concept of Han, but yeah, let's be open-minded.
Absolutely, if they have similar history. I mean, Jews, their oppression by their own people, Myanmar, the common people, are oppressed by the government as well.
I do not think that what we refer to as this cluster of affects, emotions, ideas bound in the concept of Han is uniquely felt by Koreans. Korea is not the only group of people to have experienced modern colonization, modern conventional war, foreign occupations.
Han is rooted in Korea's history and culture, but the feelings anyone may experience,
I don't know if it is really originally to Koreans only. I think there will be similar things, especially South America.
During the Black Lives Matter movement, I saw in just popular level discourse, there was a lot of what I saw as a transnational, cross-cultural solidarity discourse, specifically in the sense that there were shared suffering and shared struggles and connecting it, with the Black American communities and their articulations of rage.
Any community, collectively, they can have that same feeling. Han is not just Korean.
As time stretches further from the wounds of the past, so too does the weight of Han begin to shift. For some, it remains a deeply felt inheritance, woven into the fabric of identity and collective memory. For others, especially younger generations, it is a distant echo, acknowledged but not always personally experienced. In a rapidly growing Korea, where history meets modernity and tradition collides with globalization, how will Han change?
The older generation may have more difficulties in their lives. Difficulties were severe than now.
I believe Han is still an important part of Korean culture, as the events that shaped this concept are really significant chapters of Korean history, and we cannot just remove and just move forward.
We're going to learn history. The fight for the feminism Korean society experiences right now is another way of on.
There is something to be said about inheriting violence or trauma. Growing up hearing my grandmother's wartime stories of witnessing mass violence.
Yeah, it is definitely a big part of our culture, but Han is hard to feel during our everyday life.
The sense of Han is not really significant indirectly through novels and through dramas. That is the feeling that we can still resonate with, especially among younger generations. And I believe those are the power of novels or media.
It'll be continuing and play a role in Korean society, but just in a different form of oppression. This in some way also still, but the younger generation can have more content of their lives.
When we talk about Han being this uniquely Korean concept that resists easy translation, is it the notion of Han that's difficult to translate, or is it because it is inherently difficult to put into words and to articulate kind of processing of immense trauma, sufferings, whatever that may be, right?
The traditional roots of the Han may be felt more distant to the future generations, but Han is about resilience, endurance, and finding hope through struggle, and can be adapted to contemporary issues. In the future, Han can maybe expressed through stories of overcoming personal resilience, but also with collective historical traumas.
Perhaps leaving some things as the way that they are, right? Something that is very difficult to articulate, maybe difficult to express or present. Maybe that's also a very meaningful way to reckon with these historical traumas.